A homeless black man saves a child from bullies. Little does he know that this will be a life-changing turning point. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. In the heart of a bustling city, the local park thrummed with life. Laughter echoed through the air as families spread picnic blankets under the shade of sprawling oak trees, while children raced around on the playground, their joy infectious. Chris, a homeless man in his mid-40s, often found solace here. It was a place where he could sit quietly, listening to the cheerful sounds of others while momentarily forgetting the weight of his struggles. Today was no different. He leaned against the rough bark of a tall oak, his back pressed into its embrace as he took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill his lungs. The sun filtered through the leaves, creating patterns of light that danced on the ground. For a brief moment, Chris felt a sense of peace wash over him, a fleeting escape from the harsh realities of his life. However, that tranquility shattered abruptly when a sharp cry broke through the cheerful noises. Chris's eyes snapped toward the playground, where he saw a small boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, surrounded by a group of rough-looking older kids. The boy's face was pale with fear, his hands clutching his backpack as if it were a lifeline. "Please stop," the boy whimpered, his voice barely audible over the taunts of the bullies. Chris felt a pang of recognition at the boy's expression. It was the same look he had worn in his youth, lost, vulnerable, and frightened. The instinct to turn away and avoid trouble tugged at him, yet something deeper compelled him to act. He couldn't stand by and watch. Taking a deep breath, Chris rose from his spot under the tree and began walking toward the group, his steps deliberate and steady. He could hear the laughter of the bullies growing louder, their confidence swelling with every shove they delivered to the frightened boy. "Hey!" Chris called out, his voice firm yet calm, cutting through the chaos. The bullies didn't hear him at first, too caught up in their cruel game. He raised his voice a notch. "I said hey!" The leader of the group, a tall boy with a sneer plastered across his face, finally looked up. The amusement in his eyes shifted to irritation as he assessed the approaching figure. "What do you want, old man?" he sneered, trying to mask his surprise with bravado. "Leave him alone," Chris said, his eyes locking onto the bullies. He didn't raise his voice, but there was a steely edge to it that made the boys hesitate. "Who's gonna make us?" one of the other boys challenged, although his bravado wavered under Chris's steady gaze. Chris didn't answer. Instead, he stared them down, a silent challenge lingering in the air. The tension grew thick, and for a moment, silence enveloped them. Chris could see the leader wavering, calculating whether this confrontation was worth the risk. "Come on, let's go," the leader muttered, shoving his hands into his pockets. The others followed suit, their laughter dying down as they retreated. Chris watched them go, his muscles tense until they were out of sight. Turning his attention to the boy on the ground, Chris knelt beside him. "You all right, kid?" he asked softly, the harshness of the moment melting away. The boy looked up at him, tears brimming in his wide eyes. He nodded, but trembled slightly, his small frame shaking with residual fear. "Thank you," he whispered, clutching his backpack tightly. "I didn't know what to do." "You don't need to thank me," Chris replied, brushing some dirt off the boy's shoulder. "Those kids are just bullies. They're not as tough as they act." The boy wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a flicker of hope igniting within him. "I'm Michael," he introduced himself, his voice still shaky. "Chris," he replied with a small smile. "You shouldn't be out here alone. Where are your folks?" "My dad's coming to pick me up," Michael said, glancing nervously around the park, as if expecting the bullies to return. "All right," Chris said, his voice steady and reassuring. "How about I wait with you until he gets here?" Michael's eyes brightened at the offer, and he nodded eagerly. Chris led him to a nearby bench where they could sit in relative safety. The tension in the air began to dissipate, and though they didn't talk much, the comfortable silence spoke volumes. Chris kept an eye on the park entrance, half expecting trouble to find them again. Minutes passed, and finally, a sleek black car pulled up at the park's edge. Michael's face lit up, and he jumped to his feet, eyes shining with relief. Chris stood as well, watching as a tall man in a sharp suit stepped out of the car. His eyes immediately locked onto Michael. "Dad!" Michael called, running toward him. The man's stern face softened as he caught sight of his son, and he knelt down, enveloping Michael in a hug. "Are you okay, Michael? What happened?" "I was playing, and some kids were mean to me. But Chris helped me," Michael exclaimed, his eyes shining with admiration for the man who had intervened on his behalf. "Chris," Benjamin repeated, his brows knitting together in confusion. "You mean the homeless man?" Chris felt the sting of the label, but he nodded, forcing himself to maintain eye contact. He could see Benjamin's discomfort flickering behind his polite facade. "Thank you for helping my son," Benjamin said, his tone courteous but cool. There was a clear wall between them, a barrier built from judgment and social expectation. "It was nothing," Chris replied, shrugging slightly as he glanced down at the ground, feeling the weight of his worn shoes. "Dad, can we invite Chris to join us? I want to thank him properly," Michael pleaded, his youthful enthusiasm a stark contrast to his father's cautious demeanor. Benjamin hesitated, casting a furtive glance at Chris. "That's very kind of you, Michael, but please." Michael's voice was insistent, his gaze pleading. Chris sensed the tension in the air, the silent tug of war between a father's protective instincts and a child's innocence. He watched as Benjamin sighed, the conflict evident in his eyes. "All right, but let's not take too long. We have other plans." Chris's heart raced at the unexpected invitation. It was more than he had hoped for, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was intruding on a world he didn't belong to. As they walked toward the car, Chris felt an unusual mix of excitement and trepidation. "Do you like baseball, Chris?" Michael asked, breaking the silence as they approached the vehicle. "Yeah, I used to play when I was a kid," Chris replied, recalling the joy of those simpler times. "Me too. I'm on a little league team," Michael beamed, his enthusiasm infectious. Benjamin opened the door for Michael, then turned to Chris, his expression shifting to one of resolve. "Chris, I appreciate what you did for my son, but I hope you understand that, well, we come from different worlds." Chris nodded, feeling the sting of the truth in those words. "I get it. I don't want to intrude." "No, it's just," Benjamin started, then hesitated. "It's not that I think you're dangerous or anything. It's just different," Chris finished for him, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I understand." As Michael climbed into the back seat, Benjamin extended his hand to Chris. "Thank you again. Just be careful. I'd hate for you to get involved with the wrong crowd." Chris shook the man's hand, surprised by the firmness of his grip. "I appreciate it. I just want what's best for Michael." Benjamin nodded, releasing Chris's hand. "Right. Well, take care." With that, Benjamin slid into the driver's seat, and Chris stepped back, allowing them to pull away. He watched the car drive off, a mix of emotions swirling within him. Michael's laughter faded into the distance, and with it, the warmth of their brief connection. Chris returned to his bench, the afternoon sun casting long shadows on the ground. The encounter had stirred something deep within him, a reminder of the world he once belonged to and the life he was trying to reclaim. But for every step forward, he was reminded of the distance that still lay between him and the life he longed for. Back at home, Michael was still buzzing with excitement over his encounter with Chris. The moment his father had pulled away in their luxurious car, he had been unable to contain his thoughts about the kind man who had stood up for him in the park. As soon as they entered the house, Michael rushed to the kitchen, where his father was pouring himself a glass of water. "Dad!" Michael exclaimed, his voice bright and full of energy. "Can we invite Chris over again? I want to thank him properly. He's really nice, and he helped me when those kids were being mean." Benjamin paused, setting the glass down on the counter. He turned to his son, a frown forming on his face. "Michael, I appreciate that you want to express your gratitude, but do you really know anything about him? He's homeless." Michael's enthusiasm faltered for a moment, but he quickly shook his head. "That doesn't matter. He helped me, and he was really nice. You saw how he stood up to those bullies. Not many people would do that." Benjamin felt the tug of his son's earnestness, but struggled with his own reservations. "Son, it's not that I think he's dangerous, but you just can't trust everyone you meet. You have to be careful." "Why?" Michael pressed, his eyes wide and innocent. "He's not just some stranger. He's a good person. I could tell. Please, can't we at least go back to the park and see him again? I want to hear more about his life." Sighing, Benjamin ran a hand through his hair, the weight of his responsibility as a parent pressing down on him. All right, Michael, but this is just a visit, and it's important that you understand the world is complicated. You may not always understand why someone is in the situation they are in. Michael nodded eagerly, a broad smile breaking across his face. Thank you, Dad. I promise I'll be careful. I just want to talk to him. The weekend rolled around quickly, and Michael could hardly contain his excitement as he and Benjamin made their way back to the park. The sun shone brightly, casting cheerful rays across the grassy expanse, and Michael's heart raced at the thought of seeing Chris again. As they approached the familiar oak tree, Michael's eyes scanned the area, searching for the friendly face he had come to admire. "There he is!" Michael pointed, his voice bubbling with joy. Chris was seated on the same bench, his back resting against the rough bark of the tree, his eyes closed, seemingly lost in thought. "Just remember, stay close to me," Benjamin instructed, a protective edge to his tone as they approached. Michael nodded, but he could hardly keep his excitement contained. "Chris!" he called out, dashing forward. Chris opened his eyes, startled at first, but a smile quickly spread across his face as he recognized Michael. "Hey there, kid. Good to see you again." Benjamin approached more slowly, observing the interaction. "Hello, Chris," he said, nodding in acknowledgement. "Mr. West?" Chris replied, his voice steady as he glanced at Benjamin. "Nice to see you again." "I was just talking to my dad about you," Michael said, bouncing on his heels. "I wanted to thank you for helping me the other day. You're really brave." Chris chuckled softly, a hint of bashfulness creeping into his demeanor. "I was just doing what I thought was right. Nobody deserves to be bullied." "Do you want to sit with us?" Michael asked, his face brightening with the suggestion. "I want to hear more about you. Like, how did you end up here?" Chris hesitated for a moment, looking at Benjamin, who gave a slight nod of approval. "Sure, kid, I'd like that." They settled onto the bench, enveloped by a comfortable warmth as the afternoon sun bathed the park in golden light. Michael wasted no time in expressing his curiosity. "Can you tell me more about your story, Chris? You mentioned that you used to have a life, just like ours. What happened?" Chris took a deep breath, realizing he was about to share something deeply personal. He could feel Benjamin's encouraging gaze on him, urging him to open up. "It's a bit of a winding road, but I'll do my best to explain." Michael leaned forward, his eyes wide with anticipation. "I want to know everything." With a chuckle, Chris began, "All right, here goes. I grew up in a neighborhood where I felt safe and had good friends. I always loved working with my hands, and that passion led me to become a carpenter. There was something fulfilling about taking raw wood and crafting it into something beautiful." Benjamin nodded, recalling Chris's earlier mention of his job at the woodworking shop. It served as a reminder of the life Chris once had, despite the struggles that followed. "But as time went on, I started hanging out with the wrong crowd," Chris continued, his voice growing somber. "What began as innocent fun, going to parties, enjoying life, quickly turned into something darker. I fell into drinking and drugs, thinking they were just ways to escape reality." Michael listened intently, a concerned expression on his face. "Did you ever think about stopping?" Chris sighed, the weight of his past heavy on his heart. "I tried, many times. But it's not easy to break free when you feel like no one is rooting for you. Eventually I lost my job, my home, and the respect of my friends and family. It was like being trapped in a downward spiral." Michael's brow furrowed. "That sounds really sad." "It was," Chris admitted. "But I've learned a lot from those mistakes. They taught me resilience. I realize now that I can't let my past define me. I'm committed to making better choices every day." Benjamin leaned in, his respect for Chris growing. "It takes courage to face your past like that. I admire your determination to change." Chris felt a flicker of pride at Benjamin's acknowledgement. "Thank you, sir. I believe everyone deserves a second chance." Michael, processing everything he had just heard, asked, "So, what do you want to do now?" Chris paused, hope bubbling within him. "I want to rebuild my life. My goal is to become a skilled carpenter again, maybe even open my own workshop one day. I want to show others that change is possible." "That's a great dream," Michael exclaimed, clapping his hands in excitement. "I believe you can do it." Benjamin watched the exchange, feeling grateful for the genuine connection between Michael and Chris. "Michael talks about you a lot," he admitted, breaking his silence. "I'm glad he has someone like you to look up to." Chris smiled, though a hint of uncertainty lingered in his eyes. I appreciate that, sir. I'm just trying to make the world a little brighter, one day at a time. As their conversation deepened, Michael began to ask more profound questions, eager to learn about Chris's life philosophy and aspirations. With each answer, Chris felt a weight lift from his shoulders, replaced by a growing sense of hope fueled by Michael's belief in him. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the park, Benjamin glanced at his watch. We should probably be heading home soon, Michael. Just a few more minutes, Dad, Michael pleaded, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. Chris chuckled, appreciating the boy's spirit. You've got a good heart, kid. It's refreshing to meet someone who genuinely cares. Sensing the moment was significant, Benjamin added, It sounds like you're on the right path, Chris. If you ever need support, you can count on us. We believe in what you're trying to do. Chris looked at Benjamin, genuinely touched by his words. That means more than you know. Just knowing that someone cares makes a big difference. As they continued to talk, Chris felt lighter, as if sharing his story had lifted a burden he had been carrying for too long. This connection, this small bond with Michael and Benjamin, was something he had been missing in his life. The more they talked, the more he believed that change was within his grasp. As the sun began to set, casting a warm hue across the park, Chris found hope blossoming in his heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could navigate his way back to the life he once cherished. The following week unfolded with a renewed sense of purpose for both Chris and Benjamin. Inspired by their conversations in the park, Benjamin found himself contemplating how he could help Chris take the next step toward rebuilding his life. His friend's story had touched him deeply, and he felt a sense of responsibility to offer support. One evening, as he sat in his well-appointed living room, Benjamin glanced at the framed pictures of his family. He thought of Michael's unwavering belief in Chris, and the determination Chris displayed when sharing his aspirations. A thought struck him. He had a friend who owned a woodworking shop, and perhaps he could arrange a meeting. The next day, Benjamin made the call. Hey Rick, it's Benjamin West. I hope you're doing well. Listen, I wanted to ask if you have any openings at your shop. I know someone who could really use a second chance, a talented carpenter who fell on hard times. On the other end, Rick's voice was enthusiastic. I'm always looking for good help, Ben. Bring him by. I'd be happy to meet him. Benjamin felt a surge of excitement. This was the opportunity Chris needed. After hanging up, he quickly called Michael. Hey buddy, how would you like to help me surprise Chris today? What do you mean? Michael asked, intrigued. I want to introduce him to my friend Rick at the woodworking shop. I think it could be a great chance for him. Let's do it. I can't wait to see Chris again, Michael exclaimed, bouncing on his feet. Later that afternoon, they made their way to the park, where Chris was seated on the same bench. The moment he saw them, a smile lit up his face. Hey, you two. Good to see you again, Chris greeted, his expression brightening. Hi, Chris. We have something exciting to share, Michael said, practically jumping with anticipation. Benjamin stepped in. Chris, I spoke with a friend who owns a woodworking shop, and he's looking for someone to help. I mentioned you, and he's interested in meeting you. Chris's eyes widened, and he seemed momentarily speechless. You're serious? You think he'll give me a chance? I know he will, Benjamin replied, his voice steady. All you need to do is show him what you can do. Chris took a deep breath, feeling a rush of hope and nerves. I don't know what to say. This is incredible. Michael grinned, his excitement infectious. You can do it, Chris. I know you can. With their encouragement, Chris felt the flutter of excitement turn into determination. When do we go? Right now, Benjamin said, clapping Chris on the shoulder. Let's not waste any time. The trio made their way to Rick's woodworking shop, a cozy place filled with the earthy scent of freshly cut wood and the sounds of tools at work. As they entered, Rick looked up from a table where he was assembling a cabinet. His face broke into a grin. Benjamin, good to see you. And you must be Chris, he said, extending a hand. I've heard a bit about you. Chris shook Rick's hand, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me. Absolutely, Rick replied, gesturing for Chris to take a seat. I hear you're a carpenter. Tell me about your experience. Chris found himself sharing his past work, detailing the projects he had completed and the joy he found in creating beautiful pieces of furniture. As he spoke, he noticed Rick listening intently, nodding in appreciation. "You've got a real passion for this work, and that's important," Rick said, leaning back in his chair. "But I also know it takes more than skill. It takes dedication. Are you ready for that?" "Yes, I am," Chris answered, his voice steady. "I've learned from my mistakes, and I want to make things right this time. I'm ready to work hard." Rick smiled. "I appreciate that honesty. Let's give this a shot. I'll start you out as an apprentice. If you prove yourself, there may be a long-term spot for you here." Chris felt a surge of relief and joy. "Thank you. I won't let you down." After the meeting, as they stepped out into the sunshine, Michael was practically bouncing on his heels. "You did it, Chris. You're going to be a carpenter again." Chris looked down at Michael, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you two. Thank you for believing in me." Benjamin placed a hand on Chris's shoulder. "This is just the beginning. We're here to support you every step of the way." As they walked back to the park, Chris felt a sense of renewed hope wash over him. For the first time in a long while, he could see a path forward, a chance to reclaim his life and dreams. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but with the support of Michael and Benjamin, he felt ready to take on whatever came next. As Chris began his first week at the woodworking shop, he was filled with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The early mornings were filled with the sound of saws cutting through wood, the scent of fresh lumber, and the vibrant energy of workers dedicated to their craft. Yet, amid this bustling environment, Chris struggled to keep pace with the demands of his new job. On the first day, Rick assigned Chris to help with basic tasks, sanding down pieces of furniture and organizing the workshop. While these responsibilities were straightforward, Chris quickly realized that the physical labor took a toll on his body, which had grown accustomed to a different kind of strain. By the end of the day, his muscles ached, and he felt a sense of exhaustion that was both familiar and unsettling. In the following days, the weight of financial burdens began to loom over him again. Bills were piling up, and he could hardly afford the basics. The stress of his past life still haunted him, casting a shadow over this fresh start. Each time he glanced at his empty wallet, a wave of panic washed over him, making it difficult to concentrate on the tasks at hand. One afternoon, while Chris was meticulously sanding a tabletop, he noticed Rick observing him. The shop owner approached, his expression thoughtful. "You're doing well, Chris, but I can see you're holding back. Is everything all right?" Chris hesitated, the pressure of his struggles tightening around him. "It's just, I have some financial issues I'm dealing with. I'm trying to keep my head above water, but it's hard." Rick nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I get it. Starting fresh is no easy task, especially when life has thrown a few punches. If you ever need to talk, I'm here. We all go through tough times." Chris appreciated Rick's sincerity, but he felt embarrassed admitting how dire his situation was. "Thank you. I'll manage." But as the days turned into weeks, Chris found himself battling more than just the physical demands of the job. The emotional weight of his past began to resurface, creeping into his thoughts when he least expected it. Memories of homelessness, addiction, and the isolation that came with those experiences often invaded his mind during quiet moments at work. On a particularly challenging day, Chris received a call from a collection agency demanding payment for an old debt. The voice on the other end was relentless, and as Chris listened, he felt the walls closing in. After hanging up, he sat on a bench outside the shop, staring blankly at the ground, feeling defeated. Michael spotted him from a distance and ran over, concern etched on his young face. "Chris, are you okay? You look sad." Chris forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just a rough day, buddy. Nothing I can't handle." Michael sat beside him, his small frame radiating warmth. "You're my hero, you know? You saved me from those bullies. If you can do that, you can handle anything." Chris felt a flicker of hope at Michael's words. "Thanks, kid. That means a lot. I just need to figure some things out." Benjamin arrived shortly afterward and sensed the tension in the air. He approached, placing a reassuring hand on Chris's back. "Hey, you've been doing great work. Don't let the weight of the past hold you down. You're building something new here." Chris looked up, meeting Benjamin's encouraging gaze. "I appreciate that, but it's hard to shake off everything I've been through. It feels like I'm constantly battling my old self." "That's part of the journey," Benjamin replied thoughtfully. "Just remember, You're not alone in this. We're here for you. Let's tackle it together." The warmth of their support rekindled a sense of determination within Chris. That evening, he returned home and sat down with a notepad. He started jotting down his expenses, figuring out what he could cut back on, and devising a plan to manage his finances better. It was a small step, but it made him feel empowered. As the weeks went by, Chris began to adapt to the rigors of his new life. He pushed through the exhaustion, reminding himself that every day was a chance to rebuild. With the support of Benjamin and Michael, he felt less alone in his struggles. He realized that accepting help didn't signify weakness. Instead, it demonstrated strength and courage. Though the path ahead remained fraught with challenges, Chris felt a glimmer of hope flickering within him. He was ready to confront his past, and with the tools he was gaining, he began to believe that he could indeed forge a brighter future. Weeks passed, and with each sunrise, Chris began to find his rhythm at the woodworking shop. The initial fatigue he felt was now intertwined with a burgeoning sense of purpose. He embraced the early mornings, often arriving before the sun rose, eager to dive into the work that had become his lifeline. As Chris honed his skills, he discovered a passion for crafting furniture that he never knew he had. He found joy in transforming raw pieces of wood into beautiful, functional works of art. His hands, once calloused from hardship, were now becoming adept at shaping and refining, creating something that could not only serve a purpose, but also carry a piece of his soul. One crisp afternoon, while Chris was engrossed in constructing a dining table, Michael came rushing into the shop, a wide grin plastered across his face. "Chris, guess what?" Chris looked up from his work, his curiosity piqued. "What's up, kiddo?" "I drew a picture of you at school," Michael exclaimed, holding up a colorful drawing that depicted Chris standing tall, surrounded by trees and tools. The joy radiating from the drawing was infectious. Chris chuckled, his heart warming at the gesture. "Wow, that looks amazing. You really captured my good side," Michael giggled, stepping closer to admire his own handiwork. "I wanted to show everyone how cool you are. Can I hang it up in the shop?" "Absolutely," Chris replied, touched by the thoughtfulness. They found a spot on the wall, and Chris helped him tape it up. As the drawing took its place, Chris felt a sense of belonging he had not experienced in years. That evening, as Chris prepared to leave the shop, he noticed Michael waiting outside, bouncing on his heels. "Can we go to the park now?" Michael asked, eyes wide with excitement. Chris smiled, the boy's enthusiasm infectious. "Sure thing, let's go." At the park, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the playground. They found a quiet bench and sat down, enjoying the sounds of laughter and joy surrounding them. "Do you think you'll always work in the shop?" Michael asked, looking up at Chris with genuine curiosity. Chris pondered the question, feeling a weight lift from his heart. "I hope so, Michael. It's not just a job for me. It's a chance to create, to be part of something. I feel like I'm building my life again, one piece at a time." Michael nodded, absorbing Chris's words. "That's awesome. You're like a superhero who makes furniture instead of fighting bad guys." Chris laughed, his spirits lifting. "I guess you could say that. Every table, every chair I make is like a little victory for me." As they talked, Chris realized that this connection with Michael had become a cornerstone of his new life. It was a bond that transcended their circumstances, a reminder that kindness and friendship could flourish in unexpected places. Weeks turned into months, and Chris continued to flourish in his role. His confidence grew as he tackled more complex projects at the shop, earning respect from his coworkers. The support from Benjamin and Michael was a constant source of encouragement, grounding him as he navigated this new chapter of his life. One afternoon, after finishing a particularly challenging piece, Chris stood back to admire his work, a beautifully crafted oak table, its surface gleaming in the light. Just then, Benjamin entered the workshop, a look of admiration on his face. "Chris, this is incredible," he exclaimed, running his fingers over the smooth finish. "You've really found your groove here." "Thanks, Benjamin," Chris replied, a proud smile spreading across his face. "It feels good to create something from nothing." Benjamin paused, studying Chris's expression. "I can see how much this means to you. It's not just about the work, it's about your journey." Chris nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude for the support he had received. "I wouldn't have made it this far without you and Michael. You both have given me a reason to keep going." That night, as Chris lay in bed, he reflected on how far he had come. The shadows of his past still lingered, but they no longer defined him. He had begun to forge a new identity, one built on resilience, creativity, and the relationships he cherished. As sleep took him, Chris dreamed of bright futures filled with possibilities, each day a new canvas waiting for him to shape it. He awoke with a renewed sense of hope, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Chris felt the vibrant colors of autumn surround him as he walked alongside Michael, who was animatedly recounting his day at school. The laughter of children echoed around them, a reminder of the joy that thrived in this place. As they approached the playground, Chris reflected on the upcoming changes in his life. He had been offered a place to stay at the woodworking shop, where he had found employment, a gesture that filled him with gratitude and hope. It was more than just a job. It was a chance for stability and a fresh start. While the thought of joining a family gathering at Benjamin's home both excited and unnerved him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was moving in the right direction. The comfort of knowing he was welcomed into their world was a step into uncharted territory, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging that he had longed for. "Are you excited for the party?" Michael asked, bouncing on his feet. "Yeah, I am," Chris replied, forcing a smile to mask his apprehension. "Just a little nervous, that's all." "Don't worry. My dad says you're like family now," Michael assured him, the innocent confidence of a child shining through. As they reached the West family home, Chris paused for a moment, taking in the beautifully decorated exterior and the sounds of laughter spilling from inside. He had grown accustomed to the kindness of Benjamin and Michael, yet the thought of stepping into their world felt daunting. "Come on, Chris!" Michael tugged at his sleeve, breaking him from his thoughts. With a deep breath, Chris followed Michael inside, where the warmth of the gathering enveloped him. Friends and family milled about, sharing stories and laughter, and the aroma of delicious food filled the air. It felt almost surreal to be included in such a celebration. Benjamin spotted them from across the room and made his way over, a welcoming smile on his face. "Chris, I'm glad you could make it. We've been looking forward to having you here." "Thanks for inviting me," Chris replied, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. "It's really nice to be here." As they mingled, Chris was introduced to various family members and friends. He felt nervous at first, but as the evening unfolded, the atmosphere became more comfortable. The warmth of their acceptance began to wash away his lingering doubts. During dinner, seated around the table, Chris listened as stories flowed freely. Laughter erupted as Michael shared tales of his school adventures, and Chris found himself smiling at the joy radiating from the family. They included him in the conversations, asking about his life and experiences, and he shared snippets of his journey, carefully choosing what to reveal. After dinner, the children gathered in the living room for games, while the adults engaged in more serious discussions. Chris helped Michael set up a board game, his heart swelling at the bond they were forging. "See, it's just like I said. You're part of our family now." Michael beamed, and Chris felt a deep sense of gratitude for the connection they had developed. As the evening wore on, Chris found himself in a quiet corner with Benjamin, who leaned against the wall, watching the chaos of laughter unfold. "How are you finding everything?" Benjamin asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "It's wonderful," Chris admitted, glancing at the joyful scene. "I didn't expect to feel so included. It's nice to feel like I belong somewhere." Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. "You've earned that, Chris. Everyone deserves a second chance, and you're making the most of yours." The sincerity in Benjamin's words resonated with Chris. For the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope that life could be different, that he could be different. As the night came to a close, Chris reflected on the warmth he had felt throughout the evening. It wasn't just about being invited to a gathering, it was about being accepted, flaws and all, into a community that celebrated connection and understanding. When he finally left, Michael hugged him tightly. "You'll come back again, right?" "Of course I will," Chris replied, kneeling down to meet the boy's gaze. "You're stuck with me now?" With a heart full of hope, Chris walked home, the crisp night air filling his lungs. He felt lighter, as though the burdens he carried were slowly being lifted by the power of friendship and community. He had settled into his job at the woodshop, where he had begun to learn the intricacies of furniture crafting. The rhythmic sound of saws and the scent of freshly cut wood had become familiar comforts, a stark contrast to the chaos of his past. One fateful afternoon, while taking a break outside the shop, Chris's heart sank as he spotted Ray, an old friend from his tumultuous past, approaching. Ray had always been a wild spirit, one who thrived on adrenaline and risk, and seeing him now stirred a mix of nostalgia and apprehension within Chris. "Chris! Long time no see!" Ray called, his voice boisterous and brimming with that same reckless energy Chris once found intoxicating. It was a sound that echoed memories of nights spent on the edge of chaos, laughter mixed with poor decisions. "Yeah, it's been a while," Chris replied cautiously, his heart racing as he took in Ray's familiar, albeit disheveled, appearance. Chris felt the weight of memories associated with Ray's presence flooding back. The nostalgia mixed with apprehension created a tight knot in his stomach. He had fought hard to distance himself from that life, the temptations, the chaos, and the constant thrill of risk. But Ray's arrival was like a siren call, beckoning him back to a world he was determined to leave behind. "Still working with wood, huh? You always had a knack for it," Ray remarked, a grin spreading across his face as he gestured toward the shop. Chris felt a twinge of unease. Their friendship had flourished in a haze of bad decisions, and he was acutely aware of how easily old bonds could lead to relapse. "Let's talk somewhere quieter," Chris suggested, glancing around the bustling street filled with passers-by. He didn't want their conversation to be overheard, nor did he want the weight of the world to press down on him in front of the onlookers. They moved to a nearby park, a place Chris frequented for solace. As they settled onto a bench under the shade of a large oak tree, the atmosphere shifted. The chaos of the city faded, replaced by the gentle rustling of leaves and distant laughter of children playing. "So, how's life treating you?" Ray asked, a genuine curiosity in his eyes. Chris could sense the camaraderie from their past, but he also noticed the underlying tension in the air. "It's different," Chris admitted, his gaze drifting to the ground. "I've been trying to make things right. Working at the woodshop has been a good change for me." He hesitated, weighing his words carefully. "I'm not in that life anymore." Ray leaned back, crossing his arms. "I get it, but you can't just run from who you are, man. You've got to embrace it. There's a whole world out there that still needs us." Chris frowned, feeling the old pull of their shared history tugging at him. "Yeah, but that world almost destroyed me. I'm not the same person I used to be, Ray. I don't want to go back." Ray's expression shifted, a mix of disbelief and concern washing over his features. "I know we had our fun, but don't you miss the thrill? The rush?" Chris took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the conversation. "It's not about missing the thrill, it's about survival. I'm trying to build something new, a life that doesn't involve looking over my shoulder or worrying about the next bad decision." Ray leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Look, I'm not here to drag you back into anything. I just thought maybe we could partner up again. There's money to be made, and I thought you might want in." Chris felt his heart race, but not with excitement. "That's not the path I'm on, Ray. I've got a job, people who believe in me now. I can't throw that away for a quick buck." "Chris, you know I'm not a bad guy," Ray argued, frustration creeping into his voice. "We could do great things together, just like old times." "No, Ray. Those old times nearly ruined me," Chris snapped, the edge of his voice sharper than intended. He took a moment to compose himself, then softened his tone. "I can't go back to that life. I won't." Silence hung between them for a moment, the tension palpable. Chris looked into Ray's eyes, searching for a glimmer of the friend he once knew, but all he saw was the specter of his past. "Maybe it's best if we don't keep in touch," Chris finally said, standing up from the bench. He felt the weight of his decision, a mixture of sadness and relief flooding his senses. Ray's expression darkened, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Suit yourself, but don't come crying to me when the bills pile up. Just remember, I'm the one who knows the ropes. You could be living the good life again." "I'm not going back to that life," he replied, his voice steady but laced with tension. "I've made my choices, and I'm sticking to them." He walked away, feeling the pull of his new life and the promise it held, leaving behind the echoes of a past he was determined to escape. As the days passed, the encounter weighed heavily on Chris's mind. He felt the remnants of doubt creeping in, the allure of easy money mingling with the security he had built. But he reminded himself of the warmth of the community that had begun to embrace him, the bond he shared with Michael, and the quiet pride he felt in his work. One day, after another fulfilling day at the woodshop, "Hey, Chris," Michael waved excitedly, running up to him with a drawing clutched in his hands. "Look what I made for you." Chris knelt to examine the drawing, a vibrant depiction of the park with him and Michael sitting together. It warmed his heart. "This is amazing, Michael. You're such a talented artist." Benjamin joined them, observing the interaction with a smile. "It looks like you've made quite an impression on him, Chris." Chris met Benjamin's gaze, his earlier encounter with Ray still fresh in his mind. "I just hope I can live up to it," he confessed, the weight of his worries spilling out. Benjamin nodded, understanding the complexities of change. "You're already doing that by being here, by being present. It's not about perfection, it's about progress." In that moment, Chris realized that he had to confront his fears and his past, not just for himself, but for those who believed in him. He couldn't let old temptations drag him back into the darkness. As the night deepened, Chris shared his encounter with Ray, the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. "I know I should have just walked away, but there was a part of me that was tempted. It's just hard to shake off that life." Benjamin listened intently. "It's understandable, Chris. Temptation can be powerful, especially when life gets tough. But remember why you made these changes in the first place. You have a new life here, a chance to create something meaningful." Chris nodded, the support from Benjamin solidifying his resolve. "You're right. I won't let my past dictate my future. I'm moving forward, no matter what." With that conviction, Chris embraced the community around him, feeling stronger than ever. He was determined to confront the challenges ahead, to embrace his new identity, and to honor the connections he had made. Life at the woodshop continued to thrive for Chris, as he honed his skills and grew more confident with each passing day. The rhythm of crafting furniture brought him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. However, just as he was starting to feel secure in his new life, a challenge emerged that would test his resolve. One day, Chris received a call from a well-to-do family who had commissioned him to install a set of custom cabinets in their home. This was a big opportunity, a chance to prove not only his craftsmanship, but also his commitment to his new life. Excited yet anxious, Chris eagerly accepted the job, looking forward to showcasing his talent. On the day of the installation, Chris arrived at the Harrington family's home, a sprawling mansion that gleamed with opulence under the afternoon sun. As he stepped through the grand entrance, he was met by the homeowners, the Harringtons, a polished couple in their 50s whose presence radiated sophistication. Their smiles were warm, and their excitement for the project momentarily eased Chris's anxiety. "Welcome, Chris. We're thrilled to see the cabinets come to life today." Mrs. Harrington beamed, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Thank you. I promise to handle everything with care," Chris replied, feeling a rush of confidence swell within him. This was his chance to prove himself. As he set to work, meticulously positioning the cabinets and aligning them with precision, Chris felt a sense of pride blossom inside him. Each screw tightened and every level adjusted was a testament to the skills he had painstakingly developed. But as he immersed himself in the task, a nagging sensation crept over him, the feeling of being watched. Hours passed, and Chris was perched on a ladder, adjusting the top cabinet, when he heard a sudden commotion erupt from the living room. Voices rose sharply, slicing through the tranquility of the moment. He hesitated, unsure if he should continue working or investigate. Finally, curiosity propelled him to carefully climb down and peek around the corner. "Where's the ring?" Mrs. Harrington's voice trembled, laden with panic. "I swear I left it right here on the coffee table." The tension in Mr. Harrington's voice snapped as he replied, "It was here just a moment ago. Did you see it, Chris?" His eyes were fixed on Chris, narrowing with suspicion that felt like daggers. A chill ran down Chris's spine. No, I didn't see anything," he stammered, his stomach tightening in knots. "I've been focused solely on the cabinets." "Are you absolutely sure?" Mr. Harrington pressed, his voice now low and accusatory, as if Chris's very presence in their home was now suspect. "You're the only person here aside from us." The weight of their gazes felt like a noose tightening around Chris's throat. It pulled him back to darker days, where mistrust was a constant companion. "I assure you, I didn't take anything," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady, but the tremor betrayed the fear coursing through him. Mrs. Harrington's expression morphed from frantic to suspicious. "But you were just in the living room. It's possible you could have—" "Hold on!" Mr. Harrington interjected, raising a hand as if to silence her. "Let's not jump to conclusions. We can't accuse him without any proof." Chris's heart raced, a mixture of hurt and indignation surging through him. How could they doubt him so easily? The shame of his past loomed over him like a shadow, ready to engulf him once more. "I'm just here to do my job. I'm not that person anymore," he said, desperation creeping into his tone, each word heavy with the weight of his struggle. As the couple continued to search frantically for the missing ring, Chris's mind raced. He thought of how far he had come, only to be confronted by the ghosts of his past. It wasn't fair. He had worked so hard to rebuild his life, and now it felt like it was all crumbling around him. Just then, a small voice piped up from the other room. It was one of the Harringtons' children, a young girl. "Mom, I found the ring. It was in my toy box." Relief flooded through Chris, but it was tinged with lingering hurt. As the parents rushed to their daughter, Chris quietly resumed his work, his heart heavy. The doubt they had cast upon him had stung deeply, and he couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider, judged not for who he was now, but for who he used to be. When the installation was completed, Chris packed up his tools, feeling a bittersweet sense of accomplishment. The cabinets looked stunning, but the cloud of suspicion lingered. As he prepared to leave, Mr. Harrington approached him, a look of apology on his face. "Chris, I'm sorry for the misunderstanding earlier. I should have trusted you," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for your hard work. The cabinets look fantastic." Chris hesitated for a moment before shaking Mr. Harrington's hand. "Thank you. I understand your concern. I just wish it didn't have to be that way." Mrs. Harrington joined them, her expression remorseful. "We're truly sorry for how we reacted. It was a stressful moment, and we should have given you the benefit of the doubt." "It's okay," Chris replied, forcing a smile despite the lingering ache in his chest. "I just want to prove that I'm trustworthy." As he left the Harringtons' home, Chris felt a mix of emotions swirling within him. While he was relieved that the situation had resolved, the encounter had reinforced his fears about societal judgment. He knew that proving his worth would be a continuous journey, one that required resilience against the skepticism of others. That evening, he sat alone in his usual corner of the park with a can of beer in his hand. He reflected on the day's events. He realized that the battle for acceptance would not only come from outside forces, but also from within himself. He needed to find the strength to push past the hurt and doubt, to stand firm in his resolve to become the person he aspired to be. As the evening light began to fade, Benjamin and Michael strolled through the park, their eyes scanning for the familiar figure of Chris. They spotted him sitting on a bench, lost in thought. Approaching him, Benjamin cleared his throat to capture Chris's attention. "Hey, Chris," Benjamin called out, a serious tone in his voice. "I wanted to talk to you about something I heard. There was a situation at the house earlier. One of our customers thought they lost a ring while you were working there." Chris looked up, a hint of worry crossing his face. "I heard about that. They thought I took it, didn't they?" His voice was steady, but there was an underlying tension in his posture. Benjamin nodded, his expression sympathetic. "Yeah, they were really upset. But I defended you. I told them you're not that kind of person." Michael chimed in, his youthful enthusiasm shining through. "You saved me from those bullies, Chris. You're a hero, not a thief." Chris chuckled lightly at Michael's words, but the mention of the lost ring hung heavy in the air. "I didn't think it would come to that," Chris admitted, the weight of past judgments creeping back into his mind. "It's hard to shake off that kind of suspicion, even when you're trying to do the right thing." "I know it's tough," Benjamin replied, sitting down next to Chris, "but you've come so far since we first met. I'm proud of you, and I believe in you." Feeling a warmth swell in his chest at Benjamin's words, Chris took a deep breath. "Thank you. It hasn't been easy, but I've learned that support from others can make a world of difference." The conversation turned toward the challenges Chris had faced in the woodshop and the importance of the trust he had gradually earned. Michael listened intently, absorbing the lessons of resilience and the power of community. "I've been thinking about all the times people judged me because of my past," Chris said, his voice steady. "It's hard not to let that define who I am now, but I realize that I have the power to change their perception by proving myself every day. Benjamin leaned in, his expression serious. You've already shown that you're committed to building a new life. The past doesn't have to dictate your future, Chris. You have the chance to shape it however you choose. Chris nodded, his mind swirling with possibilities. I want to keep moving forward. I've started to think about expanding my skills, maybe even starting my own furniture business one day. Michael's eyes lit up with excitement. That would be awesome. I could help you with marketing or even designing. I've been learning about that in school. The three of them shared a laugh, and in that moment, Chris felt a sense of belonging he had longed for. The support from Benjamin and Michael was more than he had ever imagined finding, and he cherished the bond they had developed. As they sat in the fading light, the air thick with camaraderie and hope, Chris looked out at the park, a place that had transformed from a backdrop of solitude into a sanctuary of friendship. It was a testament to the connections he had forged, and he understood that these relationships were key to his new beginning. Whatever happens next, I know I won't face it alone, Chris said, a smile spreading across his face. You both have shown me what it means to be part of a community, and I'm grateful. Benjamin placed a hand on Chris's shoulder. And we'll always be here to support you, no matter what challenges come your way. As they rose to leave, the last rays of sunlight illuminated their path, a metaphor for the hope that lay ahead. The future was still uncertain, filled with both potential and obstacles, but together, they were ready to embrace it. As they walked away from the park, Chris felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer just a man with a troubled past. He was a man with dreams, determination, and a support system that encouraged him to reach for them. The journey ahead would be filled with opportunities for growth, healing, and new beginnings, and for the first time in a long time, Chris believed in the possibility of a brighter future. This story concludes here. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on the heartfelt stories I'm dedicated to bringing to you. Your support is a precious motivation for me to continue this journey, and I am truly grateful to have you as part of it.